The millionaire came home earlier than expected and found the housekeeper holding his blind daughter, but what he discovered next didn't just break his heart, it changed his life forever. The Carter Ranch stretched across thousands of acres of sun-scorched Texas land, framed by rustling oak trees and distant hills that shimmered beneath the heat. Once, the place had echoed with laughter, Sunday cookouts, and the smell of fresh-baked cornbread wafting from the kitchen. Now, silence hung in the halls like dust, thick, heavy, and untouched. Alexander Carter stood by the window of his study, hands in his pockets, staring out at the paddocks where horses trotted lazily in the afternoon sun. His reflection in the glass looked older than his 43 years. Deep lines carved into his face, hair graying at the temples, eyes sunken with sleeplessness. Since Jessica's death, time hadn't healed anything. It had just made him better at pretending. He turned away before the memories could bite down again. Jessica had been his anchor, his compass. Her laugh used to dance through the ranch like sunlight. The day she died, on that narrow, winding road slick with rain, everything shifted, including their daughter's life. Chloe had survived the accident, but the doctors said the trauma had damaged her optic nerves beyond repair. She was 7 when the world went dark. Now, at 10, she drifted through each day like a ghost, barely speaking, often curled up in the window seat of her room with her knees pulled to her chest. The brightness that once lit her eyes had vanished. Alexander had done what he thought was best. He'd thrown himself into the ranch's operations, expanding their cattle contracts, overseeing harvests, hiring more hands, anything to avoid the hollow silence at home. He convinced himself that structure and order were the solution. That's how he ended up marrying Karen. Karen was polished, elegant, a former art gallery director from Houston who knew how to wear grief like a tailored coat, not too messy, not too obvious. At first, she'd seemed like a balm to his broken life, but time peeled back her charm like weathered paint. Karen didn't like messes, and Chloe, with her long silences, unpredictable emotions, and her blindness, was too much of a mess. "Sweetheart, you need to stop dragging your fingers across the walls. It's unhygienic," Karen had said last week in a clipped tone. Alexander had overheard it while walking down the hall. Chloe had withdrawn further that night. Still, Alexander had said nothing. He didn't want to stir more conflict. He wasn't ready to face the truth, that he had married convenience, not compassion. Lately, the staff had been quitting in waves. Nannies, housekeepers, even the cook who'd been with them since Chloe's birth. Some gave excuses about family emergencies or better offers, but Alexander suspected the truth had more to do with Karen's sharp tongue and iron control. This morning, Maria, the last remaining housekeeper, had left without saying goodbye. Just a note on the kitchen counter. "I'm sorry, I can't stay any longer. Please take care of Chloe." Alexander had crumpled the note in his fist. Now, standing alone in the dim study, he knew something had to change. His phone buzzed. It was a missed call from Thompson's Staffing, the agency he'd contacted in a moment of desperation. They'd promised a replacement that afternoon. He didn't care who they sent, as long as someone could keep the house from collapsing entirely. Upstairs, Chloe sat cross-legged on the carpet of her bedroom, fingers dancing over the worn spine of a Braille storybook. She wasn't reading, not really. She just liked the feel of the dots under her fingertips. They made her feel less empty. The door creaked open. Karen's heels clicked against the hardwood floor. "You're getting the carpet dirty again," she said without emotion. Chloe didn't reply. Her hands went still. "Honestly, Chloe, you could at least pretend to be grateful. You have everything a child could want." Chloe turned her face slightly toward the window. She could still feel the sun on her skin. That was something Karen couldn't take away. Downstairs, Alexander sat at the kitchen table nursing a glass of bourbon. It was just past noon, but time didn't mean much anymore. He looked up when he heard a car pull into the gravel driveway. The agency had arrived. He stood and walked to the front door, opening it just as the dust was settling. A woman stepped out of the car, not what he expected. She was in her early 30s, modestly dressed in jeans and a collared shirt, her auburn hair pulled back into a loose braid. She moved with a quiet confidence, carrying just one small bag over her shoulder. "Mr. Carter?" she asked, her voice steady and kind. "That's me. I'm Elizabeth Watson. The agency sent me. They said you needed immediate help." He gave a curt nod. "Come in." Elizabeth stepped over the threshold and paused, taking in the house with a quiet, unreadable expression. It was grand, but there was a sadness rooted in the walls. "I've worked with children before," she said as he led her toward the kitchen. "I specialize in cases involving trauma or special needs. The agency didn't give me much detail." Alexander stopped at the bottom of the stairs and turned to her. "My daughter is blind, and she doesn't talk much." Elizabeth nodded. "I understand." He studied her face for a moment, something oddly familiar in her features, but he dismissed it. The last thing he needed was more ghosts. "Your room's down the hall. We'll get you settled. Just don't expect much help from my wife. She's not fond of interference." Elizabeth didn't flinch. "I'm not here to interfere, just to help." Chloe heard the footsteps outside her room later that evening. 2 sets, one heavy, familiar, the other lighter, slower. A voice spoke softly outside the door. "Chloe, this is Elizabeth. I'm here to help around the house. Your dad said I could introduce myself." Silence. "I won't come in unless you want me to," Elizabeth added. "Just thought you might want to know my name." Chloe didn't answer, but she turned her head toward the door. Something about that voice. It didn't push. It didn't prod. It waited. And for the first time in weeks, she felt the smallest flicker of curiosity. Elizabeth smiled quietly on the other side. The door remained closed, but a door of another kind had just begun to open. The morning sun slipped through the kitchen windows, casting long golden bars across the wooden floor. Elizabeth stood at the counter, quietly chopping apples for a warm cinnamon oatmeal. The house was still, unnervingly so, but she had already learned that noise was a rare guest at Carter Ranch. Her first night had been uneventful. Chloe hadn't come out of her room. Karen hadn't spoken to her beyond a frosty welcome. Alexander had retreated into his office before sunset and hadn't been seen since. As Elizabeth sliced, she took quiet stock of the home, polished, pristine, and cold. Not in temperature, but in feeling. The kind of cold that clung to the walls. She could already feel how hollow it was. Every polished surface seemed to scream, "Don't touch!" The sound of soft footsteps caught her attention. She turned and saw Chloe, still in her pajamas, cautiously navigating down the hallway, one hand trailing along the wall. Elizabeth didn't speak right away. She watched. Chloe paused near the kitchen entryway, her head slightly tilted, nose twitching. "Oatmeal?" Chloe asked softly, her voice brittle with disuse. Elizabeth smiled. "With apples and cinnamon, you have a good nose." Chloe didn't smile back, but she stepped closer. Her bare feet made almost no sound on the tile. "You want to help me stir?" Elizabeth asked. Chloe hesitated. "I'll guide your hand," Elizabeth added gently. "You'll do the stirring. I'll just be your eyes for a second." Chloe nodded once. Elizabeth walked over slowly and placed the wooden spoon in Chloe's small hand, then gently placed her own over Chloe's to guide the motion. Chloe's fingers tightened around the spoon. She stirred in slow, careful circles, the scent rising with the steam. "That's perfect," Elizabeth said. "You're a natural." Chloe said nothing, but when Elizabeth stepped back, she kept stirring, on her own. Karen came downstairs just as Elizabeth was setting 2 bowls on the table. "I don't recall hiring you to make breakfast," Karen said, her heels clicking across the tile like warning shots. Elizabeth turned, calm and unfazed. "There was no food prepared. Chloe was up early." Karen arched a brow, her robe cinched tightly around her waist. "Let the girl figure it out. She's 10, not a toddler." Elizabeth didn't reply. She simply handed Chloe a spoon and sat beside her. Karen watched for a moment longer, then left the room without another word, muttering something about boundaries. Elizabeth exhaled slowly and turned back to Chloe. "I used to make this with my sister when we were kids. She always put too much cinnamon." Chloe gave the faintest hint of a smirk. "I like cinnamon," Elizabeth smiled. "Then we'll get along just fine." In the days that followed, Elizabeth never pushed. She simply invited. Each day she brought something new, a wind chime she let Chloe build by identifying pieces by touch and sound, a set of textured tiles for Chloe to arrange by feel, a storybook in Braille, which she read aloud as Chloe followed the raised dots with her fingers. They sat for hours in the sunroom, where Chloe had once spent entire afternoons curled up in silence. Now she asked questions. "Did your sister have kids?" "No," Elizabeth replied, her voice warm. "But she would have been an amazing mom." "Was she nice?" "She was the best person I've ever known." They didn't talk about Jessica. Not yet. But Elizabeth knew Chloe would eventually bring her up. She just needed space and safety. One afternoon, Elizabeth brought in an old acoustic guitar and sat beside Chloe on the rug. "You ever hear a guitar up close?" Chloe shook her head. Elizabeth strummed a soft chord, warm, honeyed tones that filled the quiet. "This is called an open G chord," Elizabeth said. She placed Chloe's fingers gently on the strings. "Feel the vibration." Chloe's face changed, surprise then curiosity. "Try this string." Elizabeth guided her to the low E. "Now this one." Chloe's fingers moved slowly across the fretboard, feeling the resonance of each string. "It sounds like a voice," she whispered. Elizabeth smiled. "Exactly." That evening, Chloe laughed out loud, a clear, light sound that drifted down the hallway like a song. Alexander froze at his desk. He hadn't heard that sound in years. He rose from his chair and walked slowly toward the noise, stopping just outside the sunroom. There, through the half-open door, he saw Elizabeth sitting cross-legged with Chloe on the rug, both laughing as the girl plucked out clumsy but joyful notes on the guitar. For a moment, he didn't know whether to step in or let the moment live untouched. He chose silence. Back in his study, he poured himself a drink, not to escape this time, but to breathe. Something about that laugh had cracked the armor around his chest. Maybe it wasn't too late. Karen wasn't amused. She stood at the edge of the living room that night, arms folded, watching Elizabeth guide Chloe up the stairs. "She's getting attached to you," Karen said curtly once the girl was out of earshot. Elizabeth turned. "Children attach to those who make them feel safe." Karen narrowed her eyes. "I know your type. You come in, act like a saint, make the man of the house feel something again, and before you know it, you're sitting at the family table like you belong." Elizabeth's expression didn't change. "I belong wherever Chloe feels safe." Karen stepped closer. "You do well to remember your place. You're hired help. Nothing more." "I'm here for Chloe," Elizabeth replied, her voice calm but steely. "Not for status, not for you, and certainly not for your approval." Karen stared at her, jaw clenched. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Then Karen turned and stormed off, heels echoing sharply down the hallway. Elizabeth exhaled. The battle lines were quietly being drawn, but this time Elizabeth wasn't alone. Upstairs, in the darkness of her room, Chloe sat at the edge of her bed, hands still humming from the memory of guitar strings. For the first time since the accident, she whispered into the silence, "I think I like her." No one replied, but she didn't need an answer. She had felt it, in the way Elizabeth listened, waited, spoke gently but firmly, not like she was broken, not like she was fragile, like she was real, alive, seen. The Carter Ranch house had always been impeccably maintained. No dust on the bookshelves, no fingerprints on the polished banisters, no muddy boots past the back door. But beneath the pristine surface, cracks were forming, quiet hairline fractures in the delicate facade. Elizabeth felt them with every passing day. It began with the subtle shifts. Chloe hesitating before entering a room, stiffening when Karen was nearby, shrinking into silence after every correction. The girl never cried. She just shrank. One morning, Elizabeth found Chloe in the hallway, hunched over, her head down, hands shaking as she tried to pick up a braille book she'd dropped. Karen stood over her, arms crossed, voice sharp. "You wouldn't trip so much if you stopped dragging your feet like some lost puppy," Chloe whispered. "Sorry." "For God's sake, Chloe, you're not helpless. At least try to act normal." Elizabeth stepped forward, voice firm but calm. "That's enough." Karen turned slowly. "Excuse me?" "I'll help her," Elizabeth said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You're making it worse." Karen's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing, just swept past Elizabeth with a flick of her silk blouse and a clipped, "Be my guest." Elizabeth knelt beside Chloe and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" Chloe nodded quickly, too quickly. Elizabeth helped her up, then guided her to her room. Once inside, she knelt in front of her. "You don't have to pretend," she said softly. Chloe bit her lip. "Please don't tell my dad. He won't believe you. He'll just get mad. Then she'll get worse." The fear in her voice was real, a raw whisper laced with shame. Elizabeth's chest ached. "Chloe, no one should talk to you that way. She doesn't hit me or anything," Chloe said quickly, almost defensively. "She just doesn't like me. I'm used to it." Elizabeth took a deep breath. "You shouldn't have to be." Chloe turned her face toward the window, toward the soft warmth of the morning sun. "She says I make everything difficult." "No," Elizabeth said firmly. "You're not the problem. She is." But she didn't push further. Chloe wasn't ready for rebellion. Not yet. What she needed was power, independence. Elizabeth knew where to start. That night, long after Karen had gone upstairs, Elizabeth sat on the edge of her own bed, staring at a photo she kept tucked into her journal. A picture of her and Jessica, arms slung around each other, wide smiles beneath the summer sun. She remembered the last time they saw each other, just days before the accident. Jessica had pulled her aside after dinner, voice tight with something unspoken. "If anything ever happens to me," Jessica had said. "Don't," Elizabeth interrupted. "Don't talk like that." "I mean it," Jessica insisted. "If something happens, promise me you'll look out for Chloe. Don't let her get lost in his world." Elizabeth had rolled her eyes. "You married him, Jess." "I know," Jessica whispered. "But you see people better than I do. You see what they won't show you. I need you to see her if I can't." Elizabeth hadn't wanted to promise. Promises had weight. But in the end, she did. Because Jessica never asked for much, and now, years later, she was living that promise, even if it meant staying quiet, for now. Over the next few days, Elizabeth began teaching Chloe small, subtle things, how to use her sense of touch to map out the hallways using texture and temperature, how to distinguish rooms by sound, the echo of hardwood versus the muffled hush of carpet, how to listen for footsteps and guess who was coming, and eventually how to use a cane. They practiced early in the mornings, before the house stirred. Elizabeth would gently correct her grip, her step, her posture. "Breathe, listen, feel," she would say. Chloe, once hesitant, started to smile during their sessions. Real, beaming smiles that spread across her face like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. One morning, Chloe asked, "Do you think I'll ever be normal again?" Elizabeth crouched beside her. "You already are. Normal isn't seeing. Normal is surviving, thriving." Laughing again? Chloe tilted her head. "I like who I am when I'm with you." Elizabeth swallowed hard, blinking back the sudden sting behind her eyes. "I like who you are too," she said. On a rare, quiet afternoon, Elizabeth and Chloe were in the hallway near the grand staircase, practicing cane technique. Chloe moved with more confidence now, tapping the base of the cane in small arcs ahead of her, counting her steps, listening closely. "You're doing great," Elizabeth said, keeping a gentle distance. "I can feel the corner coming up," Chloe said proudly. "That's because you're paying attention to the floor," Elizabeth replied. "Now pivot left, slowly. Trust your hand." Chloe turned, graceful, steady, and collided directly into someone's legs. "Oh," she gasped, stepping back. Elizabeth's eyes darted up and locked with Alexander's. He had just come in from the stables, gloves in hand, face creased with confusion. "I'm sorry," Chloe said quickly, voice trembling. "I didn't hear you." Alexander looked between his daughter and the cane in her hand. "Chloe," he said slowly, "what were you doing?" Elizabeth stepped forward, her voice even. "She was learning." Alexander blinked. "Learning what?" "How to move through the house without fear," Elizabeth said. He looked at Chloe again, who now stood straighter, hands clenched at her sides. "I can find the kitchen now," she said quietly. "Without help." Alexander's face shifted, confusion turning to awe, then something else. Guilt, maybe. "I didn't know," he began. "I thought she—" Elizabeth didn't let him finish. "She's capable of more than anyone's allowed her to be. She just needed someone to believe that." He looked at Chloe, really looked at her, how she held herself, how she faced the direction of his voice, and for the first time he saw his daughter not as broken, but as becoming. "I'd like to see that," he said softly. "Will you show me?" Chloe smiled, a small surprised smile, and nodded. She took a deep breath, turned, and began to walk slowly down the hall, cane tapping in rhythm, her feet sure and steady. Alexander watched, hands clenched around his gloves, heart pounding in his chest. Something had shifted, maybe not just in Chloe, maybe in him too. That evening, Karen watched from the top of the stairs as Alexander walked with Chloe through the hallway, asking her questions about how she knew where she was. He looked impressed, even proud. Her eyes narrowed. Downstairs, Elizabeth stood near the entryway, watching the two with quiet satisfaction. She felt Karen's eyes before she saw her. The woman descended slowly, arms folded. "You're getting too comfortable," Karen said. Elizabeth didn't answer. Karen's voice dipped lower. "I see what you're doing. Don't think I won't shut it down." Elizabeth held her gaze, calm, unshaken. "I'm not here for you," she said. "I'm here for Chloe." Karen smiled coldly. "Then stay in your lane." But Elizabeth didn't respond. She already had. And the cracks in Karen's perfect little world were only beginning to widen. Rain rolled across the Texas sky like a slow drumbeat, pattering gently on the wide windows of Carter Ranch. The storm brought with it the kind of heaviness that seemed to sit in the walls, a tension that matched the quiet unease settling into the house. Elizabeth moved carefully through the upstairs hallway, listening. The house had been too quiet. Chloe hadn't come down for breakfast, and Karen had been unusually chipper, which always meant trouble. A sharp sound cracked through the silence. A slap, then a whimper. Elizabeth froze, heart thundering in her chest. She rushed forward. Chloe was standing near the open door to her bedroom, one hand to her cheek, her head down. Karen loomed above her, face tight with rage. "I told you not to talk back to me," Karen hissed. "You think you can just do whatever you want now, because she gives you a cane and a little praise?" Elizabeth pushed past the doorway. "Don't you touch her again." Karen turned, startled. "This is none of your—" "She's a child," Elizabeth snapped. "You hit her," Karen sneered. "She's a spoiled little brat who thinks she's special because someone finally pays attention to her." Elizabeth stepped in front of Chloe, shielding her. Her hands were shaking, but her voice wasn't. "You lay another hand on my niece and I swear—" The words were out before she could stop them. The air shifted. Karen blinked. "You're what?" Footsteps echoed from down the hall. Alexander's voice followed. "What's going on?" He appeared in the doorway, eyes darting between the three of them. "Did you just say niece?" Elizabeth didn't answer right away. Chloe clutched the back of Elizabeth's shirt, breathing fast. Karen, ever the opportunist, stepped aside. "Seems your new housekeeper has been keeping secrets." Alexander looked at Elizabeth, voice low and sharp. "Explain! Now!" Elizabeth took a breath. She looked at Chloe, then back at Alexander. There was no more hiding. "I'm Jessica's sister," she said. "My name is Elizabeth Watson. I used my maiden name when I applied for the job." Alexander's face paled. "What? I didn't know how else to get in. After Jessica died, I tried to contact you, but you shut everyone out. Chloe too. I couldn't reach her. And when I found out you'd remarried and that something was wrong in this house—" She swallowed hard. "I remembered what Jess asked me to do. She made me promise to look after Chloe if anything ever happened to her. And I failed. I let years go by because I was afraid you wouldn't let me in, so I came as someone you would accept, as help. I needed to be near her, to see if she was okay." Alexander's jaw tightened. "You lied to me." "I had no choice," she said. "You wouldn't have listened. You didn't even see what was happening in your own home." Karen snorted. "Now that's rich." "Be quiet, Karen," Alexander snapped without looking at her. The room fell into silence. Elizabeth took a step forward. "You think I came here for you? For this house? I didn't come for anything but her." She turned to Chloe and knelt. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have come sooner. I should have fought harder." Chloe touched her face gently. "I knew." Elizabeth looked up, startled. "You knew?" "Not everything," Chloe said softly, "but I felt it. You're not like anyone else. You see me." Tears welled in Elizabeth's eyes. Karen scoffed from the corner. "Touching." Alexander turned slowly to his wife. "Get out." Karen blinked. "Excuse me?" "Leave," he said, voice calm but deadly serious. "Pack your things and get out of my house." She took a step forward. "You can't be serious." "I said go." Karen looked at him for a long second, trying to read his expression, to find a crack, but there was none. For once, Alexander Carter was resolute. She spun on her heel and stormed down the hallway without another word. Elizabeth stood, still trembling. "You're angry, I understand." Alexander looked at her, long and hard. "I don't know what I'm feeling," he said finally. "Angry, yes. Betrayed, definitely. But also ashamed." He turned to Chloe, who stood quietly, her face unreadable. "I let things get this far. I let her hurt you. I wasn't paying attention. I thought burying myself in the ranch would protect us. I thought if I kept things moving forward, I could outrun the grief. But I was just gone." Chloe reached for his hand. "You weren't the only one who disappeared." Alexander's eyes filled with tears. "I want to come back," he said. Elizabeth placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then come back. She still needs you." He nodded, eyes fixed on his daughter. "You stayed. You fought for her when I didn't." Elizabeth smiled faintly. "Because I love her, like my sister did." Alexander looked between the two of them. "Then stay, not as staff, not as a stranger, as family." Chloe's lip trembled. "Does that mean she can stay forever?" Alexander smiled. "If she wants to. Elizabeth looked down at Chloe, then up at Alexander. "I do." Outside, the storm began to pass. The wind died down. The rain slowed to a whisper. Inside the ranch house, the dust was beginning to settle. And underneath it, something new was beginning to take shape. Not perfection, not repair, but something real. The morning after the storm, the ranch smelled of fresh earth and clean air. The sun broke through heavy clouds like forgiveness, stretching golden light across the damp fields. Inside, though, a new kind of storm was brewing. Karen had not left. She spent the day drifting silently through the house, her presence sharp and bitter like vinegar in the air. She'd packed nothing, said nothing, but her eyes followed Elizabeth like a shadow. By mid-afternoon, the tension had reached its peak. The dinner table was set, not by Karen's orders, but by the kitchen staff, a quiet act of defiance. Elizabeth helped Chloe down the stairs, hand resting lightly on her niece's shoulder as the girl navigated the steps with her cane, each tap precise, each step full of quiet strength. Alexander joined them last, freshly showered, a slight stiffness in his movements, betraying his nerves. Karen arrived moments later, wearing her finest silk blouse and a smile so tight it looked like pain. They sat. The silence stretched as food was passed without conversation. Forks scraped plates, glasses clinked. Outside, the cicadas buzzed in the heat. Then Karen spoke. "So, Elizabeth," she began, voice light and sugary, "how long exactly did you plan to keep your little charade going? Before or after you married your way into the family fortune?" Alexander's fork froze mid-air. Chloe tensed beside Elizabeth, lips pressed tight. Elizabeth's expression remained calm. "I didn't come here for money. I came for Chloe." Karen chuckled coldly. "Of course you did. All that heartfelt babysitting and noble sacrifice. It's practically a soap opera." "Karen," Alexander started. Karen ignored him. "Tell me, Chloe, what's it like being the centerpiece of a sympathy parade? Does it make you feel important, having all these adults orbiting you like some kind of tragic sun?" Chloe's hands tightened around her utensils. "Enough!" Elizabeth said sharply. Karen leaned back in her chair, swirling wine in her glass. "No, let's keep going. Let's talk about how a grieving widower was manipulated into turning his house over to a stranger with a sob story." "I'm not a stranger," Elizabeth said evenly. "I'm her family." "Family that lies," Karen hissed. "Family that sneaks into someone else's home, pretending to be something they're not." "You mean like a wife pretending to care about a child she's bullied for 3 years?" Alexander's voice cut through the room like a blade. Karen turned to him slowly. "Excuse me?" Alexander pushed his plate aside and stood. "I saw it. I've been blind to it for too long, but not anymore. The way you speak to her, look at her like she's an inconvenience." "She is an inconvenience," Karen snapped. "You just don't have the guts to admit it. I've done nothing but try to keep this house running while you buried yourself in cattle and guilt." "You hit her," he said flatly. Karen's jaw clenched. "She's dramatic. You know that. She twists everything. She has bruises." Silence. Then a voice, soft but clear, rose from the end of the table. "She's lying." Chloe's words landed like thunder. Karen turned slowly. "Excuse me?" Chloe sat up straighter, her voice trembling but determined. "You hit me. You call me names when Daddy's not around. You hide my books. You told me I was broken, that no one could ever love a blind girl." Alexander stared at her, stunned. "You said I ruined everything," Chloe continued, "that Mom died because of me." Elizabeth reached out, but Chloe kept speaking. "I didn't say anything because I thought maybe it was my fault, but it's not. You're the one who doesn't belong here." The staff had begun gathering in the hallway. The housekeeper, the cook, even the groundskeeper. They listened in silence, the truth echoing through every word Chloe said. Karen stood, glass in hand, face pale and shaking. "You little—" Don't, Alexander said, stepping between them. Don't speak to her again. She's poisoned you, Karen snapped. You don't see it, do you? This whole house has turned against me. No, Alexander said quietly. We just stopped pretending. Karen looked around. No one came to her defense. The staff, once silent out of fear or habit, stood behind Elizabeth and Chloe. Their faces said everything. We know. We've known. I want you out, Alexander said. Tonight. Karen's face crumbled. For the first time, something human flashed behind her eyes, not remorse, but defeat. She turned without a word and walked down the hall, her heels echoing like distant thunder. A door slammed minutes later. The sound of a suitcase zipping followed. Elizabeth turned to Chloe, placing both hands gently on her niece's shoulders. You were brave. Chloe nodded, her voice trembling. I was scared. So was I, Elizabeth whispered. Alexander knelt beside them. I should have seen it. I should have stopped it years ago. You're here now, Elizabeth said. Chloe turned toward her father, her blind eyes wide. Do I still get to stay with Aunt Liz? Alexander smiled, voice thick. You both stay. Forever. Around them the house seemed to breathe again, walls relaxing, air clearing. The staff moved forward one by one. Maria, who had returned just that morning, placed a hand over her heart and said softly, We're with you. Others followed, quiet affirmations, gentle smiles, and behind them all, Chloe sat straighter than she had in years. For the first time, this house didn't feel like a cage, it felt like home. The Carter Ranch never looked brighter. It wasn't the paint or the renovations. Those would come later. It was something else, a shift in the air, in the way doors were left open instead of closed, in the quiet hum of voices and laughter drifting down the hall, in the way Chloe's footsteps no longer tiptoed. They walked steady and sure, guided by rhythm, memory, and growing confidence. Alexander Carter stood at the kitchen island, holding a grapefruit in one hand and a peeler in the other. He frowned down at the fruit as though it had wronged him personally. I'm doing this wrong, aren't I? He asked. Elizabeth laughed softly. You're massacring it, actually. Chloe giggled from her spot at the table. It sounds like surgery. Okay, Alexander chuckled, throwing his hands up. Maybe I need more practice. You definitely need more practice, Elizabeth said, gently taking the peeler and guiding his hand. Feel the curve. Let the skin guide you. He mimicked her grip, his brow furrowed in concentration. So this is what it feels like to be coached by a Watson sister. Elizabeth grinned. Now you know why Jessica always got the better grades. The mention of her name passed between them like a breeze, no longer sharp or heavy, but soft, familiar. Chloe tilted her head. Tell me a story about Mom. Alexander paused, surprised. Elizabeth smiled. Your mum once tried to teach your dad to dance in the barn. Middle of summer, barefoot in the hay, Alexander groaned. She said I had the rhythm of a wounded buffalo. She wasn't wrong, Elizabeth added. Chloe laughed, the kind of laugh that made the walls feel alive again. I wish I could have seen that. You didn't need to, Elizabeth said. You're laughing just the same. Alexander looked at his daughter, her face turned toward them, blind eyes bright with joy. For the first time in years, he felt like a father again, not just a guardian, not just someone going through the motions, but a man with something to give. The changes began small, new lighting along the baseboards, soft textures on wall edges, a bell on the pantry door. Then came bigger changes, ramps added to the back porch, a tactile map of the house crafted by a local artisan, voice-guided tech installed in Chloe's room. Chloe helped plan it all. Her fingers traced blueprints while Elizabeth explained each detail. Alexander watched in awe. You think of things I never would have imagined, he said one afternoon, as Chloe adjusted a sample of textured flooring. "You've got vision, even if it's not in your eyes." Chloe beamed. The house grew around her, reshaping itself into something safe, familiar, and hers. Her confidence blossomed. She explored more, asked more questions, laughed more often. Even the staff seemed lighter, the tension long gone. Elizabeth no longer had a guest room. She had a bedroom, her name on the door, her pictures on the wall. She belonged now, not as a visitor or helper, but as family. And Alexander changed. He asked questions, learned Chloe's cues, sat with her in the mornings and helped her feed the horses by touch. He let go of the idea of fixing and embraced the power of simply being present. One evening, as they sat on the porch, wrapped in warm blankets, the sky bleeding orange and lavender, Alexander looked out over the fields and said, "I've been thinking about your mom." Chloe tilted her head toward him. "She had this dream once, back before we had the ranch set up. She wanted to open a summer camp for kids with different needs. Said she wanted it to be a place where everyone could feel free." Elizabeth's eyes met his. "I want to build that," he continued. "Not just a camp, a foundation, something lasting, for blind children, for kids like Chloe." Chloe was silent, her hands folded in her lap. Then softly, "We could call it the Jessica Foundation." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. Alexander nodded. "Yeah, that's perfect." Within weeks, the dream began taking form. Lawyers were consulted. A non-profit structure was outlined. Alexander handled the business side. Elizabeth designed the community programs. Chloe offered insights no one else could, from accessibility features to emotional needs. Her ideas became the core of the foundation's mission. Word spread fast through the town and surrounding counties. Donors stepped forward, volunteers signed up. Chloe gave a short interview for a local paper, her first public words about losing her sight and finding her way back. "I thought I'd never feel light again," she said. "But sometimes light isn't what you see, it's what you feel when you're not alone." That quote ended up on the foundation's first brochure. One quiet afternoon, Elizabeth stood in Jessica's old garden, now wild but blooming again. Alexander joined her, carrying a coffee for each of them. "She'd be proud of you," he said, handing her a mug. "She'd be proud of you too," Elizabeth replied. He looked down at the grass. "I spent so long thinking I was doing the best I could. But really, I was just surviving." Elizabeth nodded. "Surviving has its place, but Chloe needed you to live, and now you are." He glanced toward the house, where Chloe was sitting by the porch with a new tactile journal, her fingers flying over the pages. "She's something else," he said. "She always was," Elizabeth whispered. They stood in silence for a while, no need for more words. The wind carried the scent of lavender and honeysuckle. The sky stretched wide and forgiving. The cracks in the porcelain had not just been filled, they had been transformed. What once felt broken now felt whole in a different, deeper way. And for the first time in a long time, the Carter Ranch didn't feel haunted. It felt like the beginning of something good. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, filled with warm laughter and the hum of anticipation. Crystal chandeliers cast soft reflections across white linen tables, and the scent of fresh-cut roses mingled with the distant notes of a string quartet tuning up. The inaugural gala for the Jessica Foundation had drawn guests from across Texas and beyond, donors, doctors, educators, artists, but none of them were the reason the room felt electric. All eyes were on the stage. At the center stood Chloe Carter, now 17, radiant in a simple black dress, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She stood tall, a white cane resting by her side, a quiet confidence glowing from within. Behind her, a grand piano waited. To her left, Elizabeth Watson, now the foundation's director, stood with pride swelling in her chest. And beside her, Alexander Carter, suited and somber, carrying something deeper than wealth or authority, the gratitude of a man given a second chance at fatherhood. Alexander stepped up to the podium first, adjusting the mic with a steady hand. "I used to believe that some things, once broken, could never be made whole again," he began. "I lost my wife, my daughter lost her sight, and I lost myself in the process. I thought hard work and discipline could fix it, but the truth is, only love can do that." He paused, clearing his throat. "The Jessica Foundation was born from grief, but it lives because of hope, because of a little girl who found her way back to the world through courage and music, because of a woman who kept a promise, because of people who cared enough to show up." Applause rippled through the room. Alexander stepped back. Then Chloe approached the piano. She ran her fingers lightly across the keys, the motion familiar, reverent. The room fell silent. "My mom loved music," she said, her voice clear and poised. "She used to sing to me while cooking. After the accident, I thought I'd never hear that kind of music again. I couldn't see. I didn't speak. I was scared all the time. And then someone came into my life who changed everything." She turned slightly toward the crowd. "This song is for my mother. But it's also for the woman who helped me learn how to see again, not with my eyes, but with my heart." Her fingers touched the keys and the first note rang out, soft, haunting, full of memory. The melody rose gently, painting the air with the story she couldn't tell in words. Each chord carried loss, then healing, then a burst of something luminous, like sunlight breaking through clouds. The music was delicate but not fragile, bold but never loud. It was Chloe, her journey, her scars, her strength. As she played, Elizabeth reached for Alexander's hand. He squeezed it tightly, his eyes locked on his daughter, heart aching with pride. When the final note faded into silence, the room erupted with applause. But Chloe didn't move at first. She sat still, a soft smile on her lips, listening, not just to the sound, but to what it meant. When she stood and turned toward the crowd, her smile widened. And that was when the lights above the stage dimmed, replaced by dozens of soft, glowing lanterns descending from the ceiling. A surprise arranged by the staff. Each one carried a name. Donors, volunteers, families, and most importantly, children helped by the foundation. Chloe stood beneath the lights, her face aglow, surrounded by the warmth of community, of memory, of purpose. She didn't need to see them. She could feel them. The room rose in a standing ovation. Elizabeth wiped a tear from her cheek. Alexander leaned in and whispered, "She's her mother's daughter." "She's her own light," Elizabeth replied. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the last candles had burned low, Chloe stood alone on the stage, running her hands over the piano keys once more. Elizabeth approached quietly. "You were incredible," Chloe smiled. "I wasn't alone up there." "No," Elizabeth said. "You never are." Chloe turned toward the sound of her aunt's voice, face soft. "Thank you for never giving up on me." Elizabeth brushed a strand of hair from Chloe's face. "You gave me someone to fight for. That saved me too." They stood in silence for a moment, the ballroom now quiet and dim. Chloe whispered, "Do you think Mom heard it?" Elizabeth nodded. "I know she did." Outside, the stars blanketed the sky in a quiet canopy of light. Inside, Chloe turned back to the piano and placed her hand on its frame, letting her fingers rest there, not to play, but simply to feel. She had walked through darkness. She had been broken and rebuilt. And now, standing on that stage, Chloe wasn't just a survivor. She was a beacon, Sometimes the smallest moments change the biggest lives. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe for more.